The conversation today is starting then with a conversation with Yvonne Weldon, who is a First Nations woman, and to bring in the appropriate place then to start, because of the history of this country, is with First Nations perspectives on social cohesion. And so we're going to have a very rich conversation about that. Yvonne's on the road at the moment, so we're waiting for her to arrive at her destination so that she can join us on the screen. But I'd like to share with you a little bit about why I'm so excited to be having this conversation with her and why I'm so happy that this is part of this conversation today. And it comes from my own experience. And when I was a young lawyer, or not even that young, I was 30, I ended up working in the Northern Territory. And I went up there as someone who thought of herself as pretty educated, pretty on it. I read the news every day. I'd had this fantastic education. I'd gone to university. I knew a few things. I was this smart lawyer with her shiny black shoes. I was on it. And I went up there thinking I was going to change the world. And what happened, of course, at no surprise, is that my world was the world that got changed. And I moved into a city where 10% of the population was either Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander. My neighbours were Aboriginal, my colleagues were Aboriginal, my clients were Aboriginal, my employers were Aboriginal, and my niece's friends at school were Aboriginal. Like I was constantly, every day, exposed to the First Nations lenses on the world, and First Nations values and ways of engaging with each other and with society, and also lived experience. And it completely, I had this explosive leap forward in my understanding of so many things, and I realised how my perspective, though it was well educated in my world, was quite narrow. And it was an incredibly exciting period in my life. I was there for 12 years, and every year that went by, the more I realised how little I knew. And I encountered very exciting notions of kindness, of interconnectedness, that made me able to imagine the world in a completely different way, and to imagine possibilities for our society if we can incorporate all these different ways of knowing, doing and being into our lives and our discussions, and the ways we talk about social cohesion and the pathways we map towards a greater, ever greater social cohesion. And so that's why I'm very excited to be able to talk to Yvonne today. I don't know if she is with us yet. No. Can we tell you some more stories from my life? I remember being very happy as a child. No, I'll tell you one more story while we wait for everyone. So another incredible opportunity I had when I was living in the Northern Territory was that a senior elder and lawman from Arnhem Land told me that he wanted to tell his life story for several reasons, but one of which was to encourage the young people from his community to understand the importance of walking in both worlds and finding ways to fuse those worlds together. And he wanted to show them that he had had a lifetime of learning and had attained, I mean, obviously he was hugely educated and incredible status, and traditional status within his own Yolngu background. He had also pursued Western education in a variety of forms, and he wanted to tell his story to help bring this understanding to the young people in his community and inspire them to take power in both hands and learn ways to maintain both those educational systems within their own lives. And so I had this incredible opportunity to sit with him and hear his life story. And of course also, like normally it's very rude to ask questions. You just get taught what you should be taught. But because of my unique role, which was to put his story in writing for others to understand, because he also wanted non-Indigenous people to learn from this as well, I was allowed to ask questions. And so he would explain things to me and I'd get to say, well, okay, but you know, a white fella's going to hear that this way, is that what you mean? And sometimes he'd be like, yes, that's what I mean. And other times he'd be like, no, this is what I mean. And so I got a lot of concepts explained to me in different ways. And one thing that I thought was really interesting in terms of social cohesion, and this is, again, what I heard. This is not me saying this is what we all need culture teachers, because it's only my understanding of what I took away from it. But we were talking about this concept of time. And one of the things that he explained to me was one of the differences between my cultural background and his cultural background was around when it's time to get started. So in my cultural background, if you set the time, everyone has to scramble, get their lives in order and make sure they're there on time, because when the time's set, that's time to get started. And he was so everyone has to be ready when it's time to start. And he was like, but in his culture, as I understood it, and I really hope I'm getting this right, he was saying, no, it's time to start when everyone's ready. Because it's really important that everyone is included and everyone is there and everyone can be part of it, and no one is excluded because of the complexities of their own lives or the other priorities that have come up, or, you know, the real thing is that we're all doing this together, and it's not that the person who has the most power decides when it's the best time to do it. And so that was one of the things that I've taken away with me always is, what am I doing to make sure everyone can be there and be ready and be part of it? And if the time can't be shifted, what am I doing to support everyone's potential to be able to be there and participate? And so that's one very important life lesson I've taken away from living in the Territory. And it looks like, thank goodness, before you have to see any more of my banging on, Yvonne is now able to join us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you so much. I know that you have so much on your plate at the moment, and we're so grateful for you fitting us in.
I'm just trying to get a different background. I don't know how to do this.
Don't worry, no one can see you yet.
Yeah, I'm in the car, but it's not letting me.
Don't worry about the background, it's your brilliant mind and your great knowledge that we're all after, so don't worry. We all know how busy you are.
How else could I do it? Because I'm not logged into a Zoom, I think what it is.
Yvonne, it's a beautiful background. We can see the trees outside your window. We're in a lit room with no windows. It's appreciated.
Oh, that's good then.
Sorry. Okay, well, thank you very much, Yvonne. We're so grateful to have you join us today, and very grateful to be having this conversation with you. You missed some of the scene setting, but you know what we're all here to talk about. So I will, without further ado, introduce you more formally. Yvonne is an independent councillor and the first Aboriginal councillor in the City of Sydney's 180-year history. She was born and raised in inner Sydney, but maintains strong ties to her Wiradjuri homelands of Cowra and the Riverina areas of New South Wales. In 2022, Yvonne was recognised as the New South Wales Aboriginal Woman of the Year and appointed a member of the Order of Australia for her service to the Aboriginal community. She also recently published her debut novel, 67 Days. So welcome, Yvonne. Thank you. We can see that you've made significant sacrifices to join us, and we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
As I was saying before you joined us, this session's about understanding how diverse perspectives can be woven into our understandings of social cohesion and how we see the world and how we choose to interact with each other. And so I just thought with that in mind, I've just introduced you in a very white Western way to this room, in the way my culture does it, but I'm interested to hear how you would like to introduce yourself, perhaps if you're introducing yourself to mob, or as a proud Aboriginal woman, what is it that you think is the important information for everyone in this room to hear about you in an introduction? If you'd like to reintroduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to pay respects to the elders, past and present, of the land that I'm on today, which fortunately actually is Wiradjuri country, and I'm a Wiradjuri woman. Paying respects to those that have come before us, and certainly if I think about how when I think about myself, I think more about those that have come before me, but certainly those that have come also from me, which are my children and my grandchildren. But I also wouldn't be here without my parents, and so as a Wiradjuri woman that was born on Gadigal country and grew up I've had my own children on Gadigal country, and my grandchildren have been born on Gadigal country. But my connections to the Wiradjuri country and people and rivers, particularly my mum's people, where she grew up on an Aboriginal reserve in Cowra, on the river that's now known as the Lachlan, but known by us as the Clare. And my dad's people, which I've just travelled from, the Riveretta country on the Murrumbidgee. So I am a Wiradjuri and living, I was surviving, I suppose you could call it, on Gadigal country, but certainly in spirit and in all ways I am a Wiradjuri woman. And when I go back to country, that's when I am complete with my ancestors that have come before me.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. I think, like, right away, like, it's so apparent how there is a far more relational emphasis in that style of introduction, where we feel more connected to you and more understanding of who you are. And while there is definitely a place in the way of introducing someone where we say, well, this is what they know and what they've done, and this is why you should listen to them in the sense of their lively achievements, to introduce yourself in that relational way gives you another authority to speak as well, and to display those connections to land and to country and to the generations in your family, and also to the other network people around you. I think that's already an interesting expansion of our understanding of elements of social cohesion, is how we describe ourselves even. So thank you. So as you know, today is
Alright, you have just gone really correctly. So if you go on microphone, can I just refresh before can you just start again?
Say that again?
Something that's on it. Oh yeah, you're right, okay. Can I just refresh, just to see if that changes, because that maybe you're just...
Yeah, sure.
It's really profound, sorry, I can't even understand anything you're going to say about it. Just refresh, sorry.
Yeah. So a little reflection moment, guys. Sorry.
So you can see her as well.
Yes.
I could try, but I can't promise you won't miss things.
I think that'd be much better, I feel.
I know. That felt. Alright, if you make it.
Really sorry about this, we'll just be a couple of seconds.
Alright, so we want that. It's a mirror with the built-in display.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can hear you. You're much better now, but can you see me though?
We can see your name. We can't see your face, your beautiful face. So
It doesn't have an option for start video. Is it something that you guys have done from your end?
no, I don't think so.
I haven't jumped off. Would it be better if I jump off and jump back in, do you think? Or?
I'm just going to let someone who knows a bit more about technology than me answer that question.
Yeah.
Leave and rejoin.
Leave and rejoin. Perhaps you should. The suggestion is that you should leave and rejoin.
Okay. Will do.
Oh gosh, now you've got me giant. I'm very sorry about this, but it will be worth it when we get there. Okay. Well, Yvonne, we haven't got your face again. I don't know why, but I think maybe we will just continue the discussion. We could hear you really clearly before, so we'll just talk.
Yeah, if it pops up.
Okay. All right. So we will get started. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see Yvonne or those beautiful trees anymore, but at least you know what Yvonne looks like and you can imagine. So Yvonne, today we're exploring about a little bit of how First Nations ways of knowing, doing and being and lived experience can help expand and deepen the way we think about social cohesion and how it can be achieved. And I just wondered if you wanted to share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I think one thing that if I was thinking about my upbringing and then what I've always known, and a lot of that knowing hasn't always been from a good place in terms of safety and supports and acceptance. And I mentioned my mum, grew up on an Aboriginal reserve in Cowra. A reserve that was created to, collect all of the Aboriginal people from around the area, the Wiradjuri people from around the area, and also bringing people from other areas to Wiradjuri country, and placing them on, and it was known back in the day and still is, as 32 acres, because they were placed on 32 acres. And, when my mum was born in 1952, she was born in a segregated part of Cowra Hospital, and that acceptance of 70 odd years ago that we had segregated wards in a hospital, and that hospital still existing today, is a collective in a social way, but not necessarily in a cohesive way, in terms of making people or supporting people to live and support each other. And so that control way back then, and listening to and hearing and reliving some of those stories of my elders, has certainly shown me of how we've lived for thousands of generations around how we give to each other. And my great-grandfather, he was born in 1900. Him and his brothers were stolen and taken away and put into Bomaderry Children's Home, and then they were farmed out across New South Wales and some parts of Queensland to be like child slaves on farms and to work as these stable hands or whatever. And I've actually recently listened to a recording of my great-grandfather who passed away in 1979 about some of that experience. But Granfy was, when he was able to, he went back home to country and he married his sweetheart and they have their children, and yet here his grandchildren were born in a segregated part of Cowra Hospital. But yet Granfy, his practices that was denied from him when he was stolen, but the practices that were reinforced into him that he always knew before he was stolen and when he came back home, is about that collective, that giving to each other. And my grandfather and his sons were quite well known and well regarded drovers in the day. And most of the time the mission managers would keep all the money, but occasionally they'd let him keep some stock or some money. And he collected that money and saved it. And I remember my mum saying to me that when he was able to, he brought a TV, and it was the first of its kind on the mission. And my mum said, at the front of their house, like my grandfather's house, they put this TV out the front, like pretty much the porch, and like the whole front yard, and everyone from the mission watching this TV for the very first time. And one of those, those memories for me is that collective of coming together, and it's not just about terms of, whether it be social, whether it be family, or whether it be community. It's just that our collective of giving to each other is, I think, who we all are, and who we should never forget to be. And that for me is the representation around First Nations people across this whole continent, with hundreds of different nations, tribes and clans that, we lived here, for over 65,000 years in terms of the continuous people and continuous culture. Then that collective of us coming together, I think, is the true essence of what social cohesion can be, and potentially can be shared and learnt from, and be given to and gifted.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about kindness. It's been a recurring theme already today, and that kindness and generosity of spirit seems to be this recurring theme of what underlies all of our actions towards social cohesion. And certainly my experience with various communities has been this feeling of a very particular kind of kindness that is about a kindness without distinction. It doesn't matter who I am or whether I deserve it or whether I belong, or there's just this kindness that if they see a need in me, they've acted on it. And that's something very particular that I have really noticed in my engagement with First Nations communities. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about that.
Yeah, in the various, roles that I hold and what I have done so over the years, and just, even my own personal reflection around, my belief systems, my faith, and what I have been given from so many others is that, I've always, the question I suppose in most, if not everything that I do, is that, when something is before me, whether that be actual, paid work or voluntary work and anything in between, is the question I often will sort of ask myself, where is the kindness in this? And so if you have to look hard to find the answer to that question, then you know that it isn't there, and it isn't there freely. If you have to work hard to find the kindness, then maybe you need to circle back a little bit and reevaluate what it is and what you need to change. And I certainly, I work, and some of the work that what I'm travelling back from is I work with survivors of the stolen generations, and also their descendants and families and communities. And one of the things that, I often, like even with this, where you've got people that have experienced trauma, is that sometimes hurt people, and not always, because some people have insights into that. But I think one of the things that we can do, regardless of that, is that people may have that as a default, but sometimes it's, if we have the kindness as our default, we can always make it a lot easier for everyone, including ourselves.
Yes, thank you. And the other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking before, and you've referred to the stolen generations, and you've also referred to even when people haven't been able to be raised directly in their culture or on their land, there's these cultural values that continue to pervade the community just in a slightly different form perhaps at times. And one of the things that I encountered living in the Northern Territory regularly was the idea of kinship, and people at times being able to just identify how they were connected to everyone that they met. Like there's this, and that's a structure that I don't have in my culture. I don't meet someone and have a way of really relating myself to who they are. And I know that because of the stolen generation, some of that connection has not been able to continue in the same form. But I just wondered, in terms of that concept underlying kinship of how we're all interconnected, how some of the ways you see that playing out today and how you think of kinship.
I think that if you look at, it's like all these terms, sometimes it's odd for me because the terminology is more about people putting a label on things rather than people being those things. And I think, and even when I look at and engage through my work, but just through community connections and family connections, is that it comes back to that belonging. And when people have been taken away or removed or denied and everything else in between, I think that's one of the foundations of who we be, is that community or our interconnectedness with each other, even if we're not even related to each other, is about who we are to each other. Like when we isolate or we aren't inclusive, or we're not, we are exclusive, and it's one of the things that I'm always ever conscious of, that I don't think that judgment helps. I don't think that you sort of bring situations that you need to say sorry for tomorrow. Definitely apologising for any pain that's caused, but if you can prevent that pain through greater inclusion and acceptance, then you build upon that ripple of who we are through our interconnection, rather than cutting off and not being connected. I think is some of the greatest lessons that I've learned, like between my great-grandparents and my grandparents and parents and everyone, all amongst those layers, and like my sister cousins, and like I've got family where I've got cousins, but they are closer to me than my own siblings, or I've got friends that I've had that are my greatest strength, and me maybe perhaps for them. And I think it's about who we are and how we treat each other and how we connect with each other creates our cohesion, our connection, and who we should be socially, all the time. And when I think about, if I go back to COVID times and the mentality, and I still get very frustrated about the messaging way back then, was that we had to be socially disconnected, and putting that into people's psyche created disconnect in ways like we had to be socially distant. And you go, well, hold on, no, we had to be physically distant, we didn't need to be socially. And I think we have to be more understanding about what we impose on others, and potentially what that can do in terms of people's safety or harm.
Yes, and so I'd also think, now that we're painting a little bit of a picture about the value of some of these perspectives on social cohesion and on society, I'm interested to know, Yvonne, if you have any thoughts on how these perspectives can inform or be integrated into some of our decision-making in Australia and some of our decision-making spaces.
Like you have governments that have used terms such as, co-design and First Nations led and blah, 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 blah. And you almost feel, or you hear, and again it comes back to how it affects your psyche, how it affects you, and whether you feel that freely or whether you feel that to be restrictive. And sometimes this way it's communicated, it almost creates, it does create a them and an us, and it creates it almost as an add-on. And I think that if you embed First Nation practices, and Wiradjuri people, we are very diverse, and we're an extremely large tribe, one of the largest in New South Wales and one of the largest in Australia. But you've got diversity across the whole of this continent, of over 250 plus First Nations tribes and clans, and we have all different languages, different practices, different traditions. And so there is so much, and the fact that we have our differences, there is often a commonality. And I think for me, embedding First Nations universal viewpoint, if you like, around how we come together as a collective, how we don't take any more than is needed and give back more than what was ever taken, and how we exist in unison with everyone around us, even with those people we're not connected with, because we can all make, you know, our world, I think, better if we truly embed some of those practices. And I was just reflecting, you know, just through the yarns that I've had, and certainly with you as well, that, you know, I always, when I think about some of these led, you know, government-led often, or when some of these leaders sort of talk about, you know, some key themes, and it being an add-on or sort of a, not necessarily an embedment of who we all be. Yeah, I go back to those, you know, those Black Friday fires. Sorry, the Black Summer fires that took place, and you know, and that devastation, and how people then, you know, were collectively devastated together. But if I was to be completely honest, it was so heartbreaking because First Nations people were sharing with government and trying to say to government there is going to be a catastrophic fire, you know, let us do our cultural burns because our nature is telling us that these sort of things that will happen if we don't, because they, you know, a lot of the elders that do culture burning knew that this was, you know, there was potential to take place what has taken place, and it was all dismissed out of hand of the government of the day, and in actual fact those cultural burning programs that had existed were cut from federal government, and then they had the tragedy as they did, and then within 12 months later those programs were reactivated, and then First Nations people were leading cultural burning in places that should never have suffered in the first place. So it's I think we have so much opportunity to learn from those that have had practices and traditions to be handed down and have been handed down for thousands of generations. If we are the world's oldest living culture, as all the facts are presented in a non-Aboriginal universal way, saying that we are the world's oldest continuously living culture, then I think there's some pretty powerful lessons there if you are embedding more of that into our everyday practices. Then hopefully as we move forward we take more of it with us and take more of us walking that path together.
Yes, I think it's really, when you hear stories like that, it really drives it home that the importance of incorporating First Nations voices into discussions we don't do it because it's nice, and we don't do it even because it's fair. We do it because it's critically important to all of the well-being of all of us to incorporate that deep knowledge of this land and these very particular cultural perspectives that can enhance the well-being of all of us. And so that's why it's really good to have these conversations to highlight the importance of that. We need to break into small groups of people to reflect on some of the things that have been shared in this conversation. But before we do that, Yvonne, I just wondered if you would like to share perhaps your vision of what you want social cohesion and inclusion to look like for future generations in Australia.
Oh, look, I think, you know, like I remember it's unusual, you know, you reflect about different things over time for different reasons in parts of your life, and you know, and those journeys that take you places that you probably didn't even intend. But I remember very early on in I think it was high school, which was such a long time ago now, but and I remember them sort of saying, like, what do you see for the future? Like, this is before the, you know, 88 March bicentennial celebrations, blah, blah, blah. And that, in actual fact, I finished high school in 88, which was interesting. And and I remember we got interviewed for something for school, and it sort of said, like, where do you think that, you know, do you think that in your lifetime that you'll see the change that's needed for, you know, like for your people to be accepted, or blah, blah, blah. So I can't remember the question. But I remember saying, I don't believe it in my lifetime. But I think and if I was to think about the voice and what took place there and the outcomes of that and how, you know, First Nations people were just weapons that were being utilised from a political sphere, and really making us be, you know, we weren't human beings almost. And so it's odd when I look at all of that sort of that cycle from you know, childhood to adulthood and to be, you know, for my grandchildren moving forward. And I think who we are today will be determined tomorrow with the ones that come after us, and I'm so grateful for the ones that came before me. But we all have an opportunity today to make a better tomorrow. And you know, one of the things that if I was to think about my journey, and particularly, you know, sort of like being elected to council, is that I received so much support. I had no money, no idea, and probably still don't to the same extent, but I had people that came forward in ways that I never would have imagined, because that generosity of spirit and that giving is some of the greatest gifts that we can offer each other. But the generosity through that spirit had reinforced for me. My little grandson at the time, he was roughly 2, and he was going to preschool at Paddington, and outside his preschool was like my cornflakes, and you know, we had people of all different faiths, all different backgrounds supporting, and they sort of said, like, we need to do it on this route because we get foot traffic here, we get this, blah blah blah. And so we put these cornflakes in by chance. It happened to be outside my grandson's preschool, and the teachers observed my little grandson and said, and here he was, like, there were his non-Aboriginal, you know, classmates at 2 or so. And he said to them, he could see my poster, you know, my cornflake through the fence, and he said to his little mates, "That's my nim, you know, that's my nim." And like little kids must have, you know, was sort of nodding and listened to the teachers observed. And I thought, you know, if that could be normal for him at 2 years of age, imagine what could be possible for him when he's 20. And so I think we all need to think about what we bring to others around us, and potentially that ripple being, you know, in such a strong, positive, cohesive, inclusive, collaborative space. Because if we offer things in the positive, we'll only get more positive into the future.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thank you so much. You've interrupted a very long drive and journey today to spend some time with us, and we're very, very grateful